Good morning, everybody. Today we will have an extension. Last week we came together later on and we had a show about the national security strategy that Trump's administration had just released. Today we're going to go further into it with a special guest, but I'm going to bring in Senator Black right now. Good morning, Senator Black. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Morgan. I'm doing really well and looking forward to our discussion today.
Yes, me as well. And so I want to just add this image back again. And I know we're going to have a guest today. He's been on this stream numerous times. He's a good friend. I would say he's a good friend of me. We had the show alone without you one time, and we were going back and forth. But would you like to introduce our guest today?
It's probably a better show without me. I don't know, but
Not at all.
I'm really very pleased to have with us Jim Jatras, who is clearly an expert, particularly on issues dealing with Russia, with the European situation there. He's a great Serbian expert, and he was a significant figure with the United States Senate. I think it was Foreign Relations Committee, and anyways, very bright. And we talked about the national security strategy last week. I personally see it as being extremely important. Although there are differences. There's some people say, well, not a big thing, but I think it is. Anyway, we've got Jim on, and we're very, very anxious to hear Jim's views because he has extensive contacts in Europe. And so, Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Senator. It's always a pleasure to be here with you and Morgan.
Well, I see that many of the European figures and the European think tanks are in high dudgeon about the national security strategy. To me, that's a plus up right away, because if they are so apprehensive about it, it suggests that it does have some substance. So anyway, let me allow you to just launch into a general discussion, and I'll chime in from time to time.
Well, we could talk about the national security strategy and its significance. I think there's a kind of a disconnect in the strategy itself, that the first part of the document is very, very thematic about America first, the borders, priorities, civilizational values, things of that sort, whereas the latter part, the regional stuff, is, in my opinion, more of a repackaging of the continuity of policy that we've seen for many decades. Regarding the Europeans, I mean, it's pretty clear that in terms of the European leadership, the kind of people in power in Europe, Starmer, Macron, Merz, people like this, that Trump detests them, and which is not surprising because they are detestable. I mean, these are horrible human beings. And this is really sort of a declaration of war on that kind of leadership in Europe. But what I don't see is what a lot of people are reporting, that this signifies Trump walking away from Europe, the United States walking away from Europe. I think rather what they're saying is this administration sees these people as a liability, and they want them replaced by other more, let's say, more conservative, more populist, more, if you will, patriotic leadership, the kind of people you have, like Orban in Budapest, or Fico in Bratislava. You want to see, let's say instead of Merz, you want to see AfD. Instead of Macron, you want to see Le Pen. Instead of Starmer, you want to see Nigel Farage or somebody like that. People we can work with, but still not walking away from Europe. We still want them to double down on their military spending. We still want them to build up their military infrastructure. We still want them to be the point of, quote, stability, whatever that means, with the Russians. And so I see what they're trying to do is actually build Europe up into a more substantial force than it currently is now, with these really horrible people who are in charge, who are, as the document says, really tearing Europe down. And within 20 years, it will not be the Europe that we knew. And maybe it's already too late in that regard. We'll see.
I've I've never been a fan of this idea of moving Europe from, I think it was like 2.5% of GDP they were supposed to spend on arms and weapons and so forth, moving that up to 5%. I don't see Russia as a threat, and I think to me the thing that most demonstrates that is that the population of Russia is not very great, and they're having demographic issues like many of the countries in Europe, but they are so outnumbered by NATO as an alliance that the idea that somehow Russians are going to travel 1,000 miles from Moscow to Berlin and be parading around the streets is so absurd. I can imagine. Let's say that somehow they got a couple of brigades of Russians walking around in Berlin and Paris. What would they do? I mean, what in the world would they do? Honestly, if I were a one of these brigade commanders, and I found myself in a strange country with strange people, strange language, and I'm walking around, I'm supposed to take over this country. With what? I mean, the Russian army is very large and very powerful right now, but the idea that somehow they can march all the way to the west, to me, just an absolute logical absurdity.
Yeah, you get this contradiction even from these European leaders that are raising the alarm that, oh, look how weak the Russians are. They've been fighting for 4 years. They barely have taken, a fraction of whatever Ukrainian territory they want us. But they're going to be in Paris in no time if we don't do something. Which is it? It can't be both. And I think they know they're lying through their teeth. I mean, I think they know that this is part of the grift that I think that even this document suggests, is that these people are people who hate their own countries, hate their own people, hate their own nations and traditions. The only thing they worship is the sacred rainbow flag and diversity and importing more migrants from the third world. And they're killing their own countries. But in the meantime, they're making money hand over fist, satisfying their Manichaean ideological predisposition, which is not only directed against their own people, but against the Russians and frankly anybody, these civilizational states, which again, this document refers to, which I think really describes the kind of world that could be emerging. And these people don't want that. To that extent, I think the Trump administration, I hope, has instincts in the right place. These people have to go. The question is, okay, to what end, though? I mean, I would think that what you'd want is peace in Europe, and a new security structure, as the Russians have been saying. Why 5%? I mean, if the purpose, there's no security threat to Europe from Russia. There is a security threat from migration. You don't need 5% military spending to cut off migration. That's a policy decision. That's not a military problem.
That's right. It costs far, far less to station troops in your own country than to send an expeditionary force around the world, which is the reason that the United States, which does have expeditionary forces in, 100 countries, I don't know how many countries, they're everywhere, and it's enormously expensive. We spend more on defense than I think the next 11 largest defense spenders. It is a phenomenal amount. It's the idea that it's for defense. It isn't for defense. It is a means of projecting raw, brutal power across the globe. Now, I'm not averse to extending our power within reason, but we gain nothing. The American, whatever happens to me, it's not just America first, it's Americans first.
Yeah.
I want what benefits Americans. And what war benefits Americans? I'm not seeing any of the wars. I mean, we're involved We're fighting Yemen. We're fighting Iran. We're fighting against Russia, even though we don't, I don't know, we don't know what we're doing. But we're fighting Russia, and we're fighting everybody, everywhere. We've got troops landing here, landing there. We've got troops in Syria, and as near as I can tell, we are there fighting to support Al-Qaeda in Syria. We have American troops who have landed in Syria, and they are there to bolster Al-Qaeda, the very force that attacked the Twin Towers and the Pentagon on 9/11. Mm-hmm. So, to me, it's almost like, you know, you can make a comedy movie out of it because it's so absurd. But
yeah, I would like to, since you mentioned it, the military spending, I would like to make a mention of that. But also, right before coming on air, I was reading a report. You know, we're still in engagements with Somalia, which we have been for 20 years. And this year alone, we've had over 100 airstrikes on the country of Somalia, fighting the Shabab, which is an extension of Al-Qaeda. So it's really funny. Our foreign policy is all over the place. In Syria, we're helping them. And then in Somalia, they're still our enemies. It is all over the place. But back towards the military spending, the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, was just passed in the House. It's going to the Senate. But it was earmarked of $900 billion, almost $1 trillion. And we're already in, you know, over $30 trillion in debt. You know, I want to get your guys' take on this, because the national security strategy is positioning itself as reining back some of these engagements. But then we just boosted our military budget to almost $1 trillion, which I must add was $8 billion more than Trump had even suggested when he was making his recommendations. So you have kind of these neocons that are in office, or, you know, and are representatives that are still kind of holding a different position on national, defense or diplomacy, or how we're going to engage in the world, is that they still want to ramp this up. They're not kind of taking the president's role in what he subscribes to in this national security strategy. So I kind of want to get your guys' take on that. We talk about, I think, in the bill as well, it earmarks 800 million, with an M, to Ukraine, and I think 600 million to Israel. Those are the two foreign packages that are earmarked within that bill. So without further ado, I want to pass it on to you guys to get your guys' take on that.
Jim, what do you think?
Well, I don't know. When you talked about Somalia and airstrikes against Al-Shabaab, Ubab Shabam, whoever they are. I mean, it's I keep wondering, when's Trump going to start launching airstrikes against Minnesota? There's lots of Somalis there, but he says he wants to send them back. I mean, I would be saying, you know, fewer strikes, more deportations. I mean, that would be, I think, a better approach to it, the Somali problem, because as you say, Senator Black, the issue isn't so much America as a state or as an imperial presence, it's Americans. And yeah. I think there's a real point when you look at somebody like Ilhan Omar or somebody like that. How American are these people? I mean, a lot of these people are on, video saying that their first priority is Somalians and Somalia. I mean, there's not even a pretense when they're speaking in Somali to their own people, whom they consider their own people, rather than you, me, or anybody else that we would call Americans. They don't think of themselves as Americans. Their loyalties are not to America or to Americans. That's one of the nice things about this document. It doesn't talk only about America, but Americans as people. And I think that's something we've totally lost sight of in this country. Now, as far as the NDAA, I guess, Trump's falling short. We're 100 billion short of his golden $1 trillion that he wants. And let's face it. I mean, do we get more bang for the buck? Are we actually defending our country with every dollar or $1 million or $1 billion that goes into this? No, it's let's face it, 90% of it's pork. It's for districts and states and favored corporations for these people in Congress who, remember when Eisenhower warned against the military-industrial complex, he originally said, military-industrial congressional complex, and he had took congressional out, and he was asked why. He says, "Well, I couldn't take on Congress too. I mean, because the fact is, it's a big grift, similar to what those guys are running in Europe too, and they're connected. I mean, when Trump sat down with Ursula von der Leyen, he said how much money they're going to spend buying our military stuff. He's very transactional. A lot of it is business. It's not necessarily good business. It doesn't really support anything productive for building an economy. It's not infrastructure. Remember in his first term, by the way, he talked about first priority, building American infrastructure. Have you heard that in this administration? Not a peep about it. So again, I don't know. Maybe there's some good stuff in there. There's some good stuff in the strategy document, but I don't think we've really made a transition to putting Americans' needs first and having a spending and military posture that furthers that.
No, when let's see, I guess it was when Ronald Reagan did a very major defense buildup, and there came a time later in his presidency where Congress said, "Hey, we've worked with you, we've helped you. Time to draw down," and he agreed, and he sent out the word. There was what was his name? There was a senator from at the time he was the Secretary of the Navy, and later became a Virginia senator. But anyway, he was fairly new as the Secretary of Navy, and when the orders came down to reduce the budget, he just railed about, "I'm not going to do it," and he ended up resigning, which was, I thought, a pretty sad story on his part. Jim Webb, it was.
Oh yeah.
And but his view was, "Hey, look, I'm going to be a big Secretary of the Navy," but it showed that at least under that administration, towards the end, I think Reagan accepted that, okay, the country has borne with me. We have built up the military. It is a very fine military, and now we got to reduce the spending. I recall in the Pentagon, it was just very commonly talked about how major defense contractors would arrange to have some element of production in every one of the states, so that every senator had somebody who would get on the phone and say, "Hey, you got to help me out on this." And so Congress is very much a part of it. The defense industry has very deliberately made it an integral part of the process. But we are, as Morgan mentioned, we're $38 trillion in debt. And what is more concerning is that the curve is not one of these slow curves. It started as a slow rising curve, and now it's going hyperbolic. And there's just sort of a question: how far can we run this out before the whole thing comes unglued? We don't know. We're at 100% of GDP in debt, and we considered countries like Greece. Greece went, I think, 130% of GDP, and we said, "Oh my gosh, these Greeks, they don't know what they're doing. They can't control their finances." We're at 100% and rising rapidly. We're going to reach the point where Greece was when they were in a financial crisis. It's coming, and as the rest of the world looks at us and says, "My gosh, this is a country that sanctions everybody. They're trying to steal bank deposits that Russia has in Brussels now, and maybe it's time we get out of this reliance on the dollar." When the dollar, it may not stop being a reserve currency, but when it declines, when it is less prominent as a reserve currency, then you got gunfire there.
I don't know what that was. I'm so sorry. Something just hit the window. I think it might have been a bird, but pardon me.
Oh, well, I hope the bird is okay. It doesn't sound like it. but anyway, so here we are. We're getting Europe, which is in a similar situation. They're in a pickle financially, and we're saying, well, the way to get out of it is to spend more on arms. Well, I think it's time for the United States to severely cut down its expenditures. We don't need 11 aircraft carrier task forces. We certainly could cut that in half. And we don't need troops to be stationed in Europe and in Japan and in South Korea, generations after these wars have ended. So we've got to cut back. And Europe really, where's the threat? I don't know, Jim, can you see a genuine threat to Europe, a military threat?
No, of course not. And in fact, the bizarre thing is that Europe is, all hat and no cattle, all talk about war with Russia. Russia's not threatening war with them. I mean, they're the ones talking about, we have to prepare for war with Russia within 5 years, even though we've got nothing to fight the war with. I mean, again, the irresponsibility of these people is beyond belief, because they seem to think there's no consequences to their words, that they talk that way. And they want to, there's speculation, for example, about Lithuania cutting off rail access from Russia through Belarus to the Kaliningrad Oblast. I mean, that would be an act of war. They're talking about, seizing Russian ships. I mean, we've already seen these attacks on the so-called, ghost fleet of Russian oil, which is basically the backdoor way of supplying energy to Europe, because they're boycotting Russian energy, so they buy it through middlemen instead, because that makes it clean now. I mean, it's utterly bizarre behavior. And then people say, well, it doesn't make any sense. It does make sense if you look at it in terms of what the security document says, what I described earlier. These are really bad people who are basically waging war against their own nations, against their own economies. And sure, they're going to, the Russians are coming. But I don't think they believe it themselves, but it keeps the grift going. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, Senator, you said we need to cut back on some of our military spending. I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, I think that the internal code of how our government works as one big money churning machine simply is it's not capable of being reformed. And it doesn't help that the commander-in-chief is beating the drum for even more money for reasons that they can't really explain. I mean, in other words, I don't see where the impulse for reform can come from that actually has a chance of making a difference, because both parties, virtually all the politicians and the administration itself, all they can talk in terms of is more, for what purpose they themselves can't really describe, except maybe, war with China in 5 years.
Yeah, it's like that we cannot draw back from this situation we're in until the collapse occurs.
Yeah. Yes.
When the financial collapse occurs, it will profoundly disrupt society, as it did in Weimar Germany, which eventually brought Hitler to power. Who knows who would come to power? Mm-hmm. It could be someone radically on the left, which is possible. It could be something different, but it will be the financial collapse likely that brings about a fundamental change. Mm-hmm. And by the same token, I mean, it's a little bit similar to the war in Ukraine, where there is no truly rational reason for that war to continue. And certainly no one has ever been able to articulate a coherent reason why the United States is involved in that war. But it is, and it, all of the wheels continue spinning around, and it will eventually be decided, I think, on the battlefield. I mean, if peace can come earlier, you know, my prayers are with the administration. I think Trump is sincerely wanting to wrap this thing up, get it off the plate, and move on. But Europe has just doubled down. They, you know, they're starting to mobilize troops in Germany. The German people have utterly no interest in launching a war against Russia. But you have dictatorial governments in power. The government, people who perceive of the government of Germany, of England, of France as being like our form of government, where people have, at least ours is imperfect, but we have a voice. They don't have a voice. There is no voice of the people. The people are just like lumps of coal on a pile. It's the elitists. It's, so much of it is run by the bankers, the London bankers who, since the Napoleonic Wars, have been garnering enormous wealth by promoting wars and then financing the two sides until all of the blood is gone and the banks are flush with funds. What do you think the bankers think of the new national security strategy?
I think there probably is some division in their ranks. I think some of them see the prospect for making a lot of money. I mean, it's interesting to me that, Trump sends not Marco Rubio or Pete Hegseth over to talk to the Russians. He sends his son-in-law, Witkoff, and now I hear Larry Fink from BlackRock is getting involved. That they've got this sort of transactional mindset. Well, we're not going to meet the Russian security needs to for a long-term security solution in Ukraine. Let's try to sell them on what amounts to a ceasefire. But if we can show them there's some money in it for them too, we're gonna make a lot of money here. That somehow that's going to put dancing dollar signs in Putin's eyes, and he'll sign on to something stupid. I don't think that's going to work, but I think that's the way these people tend to think. Well, we're interested in making a lot of money. They must be interested in making a lot of money too. So let's talk about money. I don't think that's going to go much of anywhere. As far as the bigger picture, I think you laid it out nicely. Look, we've seen this movie before. I mean, we saw what happened in the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc, that it was this ossified dinosaur of a system that simply could not change. It could just keep proceeding according to its own internal logic until it collapsed. And unfortunately, I think that's the situation we're in now. I mean, even with this administration, even with some effort to try to change course, I just don't think it's possible. I think that the machinery is just too big and too dumb to really actually make the reforms necessary. Europe is even worse shape. Even if you got more patriotic governments in power in some of these countries, I'm not sure really they can make those changes in time to prevent some kind of a collapse. Now, the good news is, hopefully that collapse won't be too bad. Whereas we can get through a period where, the economy is going to shut down. The supply chains are going to, you're not going to have all this cheap stuff at Target and Walmart that comes in from foreign countries that we pay a lot less than it's worth to buy because of the dollar's significance. If we can get through that period, I think something maybe can arise from the ashes that looks a lot better. But we sort of have to go through what the Soviet Union went through in the 90s. When Russia eventually emerged from that, it took, better part of 2 decades. But they did emerge from it, and I hope the process is no more painful than that. But I don't see any way around it.
There was this saying that I was taught when I was young: is it's a greedy man's always poor, and I find that our oligarch class, like that is this insatiable drive to just acquire more money, acquire more wealth, acquire more resources, and that is why we keep extending these forever wars.
Yeah.
We see this pivot towards, which was mentioned in Pete Hegseth's general visit at Quantico, talking about pivoting away from the Middle East, pivoting away from Russia and Ukraine, and focusing on our hemisphere and China. We've spoken on this show in particular about how wild of a task and deadly of a task that would be to go in direct conflict with China. I've spoken to some military experts on the NDAA. They said they earmarked a lot of money specific for what they called sinkable ships. And then they kind of inferred that it would be for this direct conflict with China.
Sinkable and I want ships, huh? Great, just what we need. Sinkable ships.
that was from the veterans, South. But I think what I find, I spoke about this in another show that I do, is how we are being so misled by our representatives that, I said that if I go on a street corner and I ask the public, do you know about this BRICS alliance? They won't know. And I remember I had a discussion with my senator and asked him, what is your stance on BRICS? Oh, we know, we understand what a big threat it is. Yes, it is a big threat, but it's a threat is like, you guys have already lost the battle in my mind. Yeah. BRICS has majority of the population. I think with what we did with Russia and sanctioning Russia, that gave, a lot of wind behind the sails of BRICS, because that showed other nations that they could actually survive US sanctions. You guys speak on, this emergent BRICS, how do you guys see it in, you guys have both spoken about this inevitable collapse that will need to take place in order to correct the ship. I find that, it's going to be sooner rather than later, especially given BRICS is, they're gaining a lot of power. They have majority of the world's population behind them, and they're only getting stronger with, moving away from the US dollar.
Sure. And, the power of the BRICS is very much a function of U.S. overseas aggression, and particularly the imposition of sanctions. Because when the United States issues an order to the world and says no one will purchase Russian oil, no one will trade with Syria, no one will do this, that, that is an enormous insult to the sovereignty of independent nations. And you can guarantee they may buckle under, but in the back of their minds, they're going to be saying, this has got to end. We cannot continue it. So before the BRICS started gelling, I think what really has given them the force is the sanctions, the wars in the Middle East and all these places. And I think they've said, okay, we've got to work around it because we're great nations too. And so the next thing they're saying, okay, well, let's try this and try that. Things that in a nice, reasonably functioning world, they never would have attempted, but now they've attempted them. They've found what worked, what failed, and now they're beginning to have a very functional framework for trade without relying on the SWIFT system and the U.S. currency. Yeah,
well, they've got BRICS, we've got blockheads. So, I mean, it's kind of an uneven battle here. But I have to think that there's some first off, I don't think the BRICS and the other countries that are aligned against the current system they don't want to go scorched earth. They don't want to see a war. They don't even really want to see an American collapse. They want us to be able to be forced to make a course correction because there's no other way. But I don't think they really want, the death of the United States or something like that. And I've got to hope that, look, no matter what happens, I don't think Larry Fink is going to be standing in line at a soup kitchen. I think I've got to assume that there are people in the oligarchic class who also realize this is unsustainable and some transition needs to be made through whatever downturn comes, and that they're going to be positioning themselves to come out of the other side of it with, their wealth, if not intact, at least substantially intact. So I've got to hope that the corrupt oligarchs who are running everything have at least self-interest in mind when it comes to preserving something through this process, and they realize that this is unsustainable, and they've got some kind of plan, at least to save their own funny baloney wealth, even if they can't save, the well-being or living standards of the American people during the short-term transition.
Well, isn't Bill Gates supposed to be the nation's largest holder of farmland.
Something like that. And Elon Musk is the richest man in the world, right? So, presumably these guys have some kind of a plan. Maybe it's a good plan, maybe it's a bad plan, but presumably they got some kind of plan.
Well, I think the plan with Bill Gates, the fact that he's getting into farmland suggests that he is anticipating the possibility of massive inflation, and farmland is something that rises concurrently with the inflation. So the value of it is the value of what it can produce. It's not just paper currency value.
Yeah.
So the fact that he's shifting from the stocks and bonds and so forth, and shifting his excess wealth in this direction in such a massive way. If he controls the ability to produce food, then he's going to make money no matter what, because people have to eat, even in a terrible situation economically.
Well, maybe we could become a nation of sharecroppers. We can all be tenant farmers on somebody else's land. At least it's a job, I guess.
Yeah. the Bill Gates nation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we had a discussion about the climate change, all those people that are hysterical in that sense. Bill Gates has made this transition to now say that it's no longer a big deal, but his new pet project is vaccines, which of course he had that pet project, but now it's taken number one priority. But I do, when Jim was mentioning, we spoke about this after or before the show started, kind of this divisiveness in the country. And he spoke about Ilhan Omar. And it reminded me of this one segment in the Patrick Bet David podcast with Anna Paulina Luna, where she spoke about when they went overseas and they spoke to European members of the government, and they were bashing Donald Trump. And she said the only person in that room to stand up and say, you're not going to talk to our president about that, like that, was Ilhan Omar. And she said she was surprised that Ilhan Omar actually took that stance. She says, I don't care what you say about our president behind our back, but in the presence of us, you're going to respect our democracy and our president. And so I say that to say that, we can attack policies, but just given how dangerous of a time we're in, especially in American politics, where everyone is so nasty to each other, I think that was a beautiful story that we could lean on and say that, I may not agree with her politics, but the fact that she had the respect to stand up for a president that, doesn't agree with her all the time kind of shows, stands to her character, and that we should kind of rise to that occasion as well sometimes. So I just wanted to make a mention of that particular story. Because I found it was really compelling, because she said, Anna Paulina is a Republican from Florida. And she said it took her back because she didn't even have the courage to kind of confront that negativity on the stance like Ilhan Omar did. So I just wanted to make a mention of that story before we continue with our discussion.
Surprising.
I'm sorry. When you mentioned Congresswoman Luna, my mind wandered. I didn't hear anything else you said after that.
Well, she's a peculiar person as well, and I give her credit in her stance where she has really taken a bold, being the face of a lot of the investigating committees on like JFK, I believe, or the 9/11.
I'm a fan. I'm a fan.
Well, I just wrap up by saying that I hear from the members of the AFD party that they view the NSS as a breath of fresh air. I think they appreciate the fact that now there's going to be a move towards supporting populist parties within Europe, and I think they appreciate very much this caution about civilizational erasure, that the massive importation of incompatible cultures, religions, so forth, is disintegrating Europe, which is no question. I mean, anybody who's watched Europe for a long period of time, as I have, and you have, Jim, we recognize that this is a very big thing. There was a time when I used to, there'd be young women, college grads and so forth, who said, I'm going to go travel Europe. And I would always caution them, go to the German-speaking countries, go to Germany, go to Austria, go to Switzerland, maybe go to the Netherlands, because you're relatively safe there. In Germany, we're very safe. In Austria, very, very safe. I can't really say that today because now we've got a total, erasure of major part of the population, and there's, now there is violence. There just wasn't violence. And I dealt with the legal officials over there, and they were always a little bit astounded by the level of violence of American forces. And at the time, the American forces were in very good shape, relatively speaking. And yet, by comparison, German troops, they didn't have any crime to speak of. So anyway, but it is interesting to see that the AfD, and I suspect the other populist parties, are saying, yes, finally somebody is speaking out and saying what we have been trying to say all these years.
Well, it's interesting. Europe in some ways is worse off than America. But back to the question of national awareness, Americans versus an American state. In some ways, Europeans are more conscious of their ethnicity because they don't have to process it strictly through a racial lens like we do in America, where ethnicity basically means race. Whereas over there, they think in terms of German, English, French, Spanish, whatever they are, Italian. And actually, in some of these countries, they have a higher degree of national awareness. I was reading an article about how left-wing Americans want to leave the United States and go live in foreign countries, and Netherlands is a popular destination because they're so liberal, blah, blah, blah. And they mentioned the article, and this was that there was some kind of a migrant settlement place that had gotten burned down by a mob of 1,500 people. In the Netherlands, for crying out loud. I mean, I can't imagine that happening in the United States. I can't imagine a bunch of Americans getting together against some migrant settlement and demonstrating even, much less burning the place down. But you do find that even in liberal countries in Europe. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I'm saying it's indexed the fact that there are people in these countries, even Dutchmen, who are aware of, this is my country, it's not their country. And I don't think you can have that as so much that degree of awareness in America, at least not yet.
It's been very suppressed. It stems from the enactment in 1964 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which, on the surface, it called for equality, equal treatment of races, of religions, and so forth. But in practice, as it rolled out, it immediately became extraordinarily hostile towards the white race, which had been dominant and all of a sudden was down. And it was hostile towards males. I represented a woman against the Air Force back in the late 70s, I think, and went before a federal judge, and the woman's name was Joan Holland, and so our complaint was styled Joan Holland versus United States, I think, and the judge he glanced at it. He came in with a big table lined with lawyers, me on one side and the whole Air Force on the other, and he glanced down, and then he leaned back in his chair and sort of looked at this sky, and he says, I suppose under the act, it is theoretically possible that a male could sue for sex discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, Your Honor, I said, this is not John Holland. I said, this is Joan Holland. He had thought it was John.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately he sat up in his chair and got very businesslike, picked up his pen, started reading the complaint, and it just told me he was totally dismissive of the very notion
Mm-hmm.
that males were protected. And I think that went for all across the board. Christians were not protected.
Mm-hmm.
Americans were not protected. Whites were not protected. Just, it went on. That's not what the law said. The law
Mm-hmm.
said everyone is protected, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not the way that the law was applied.
Yeah.
And it's never been applied that way until right now. Department of Justice is shifting and saying, okay, these are the words of the statute. We're going to apply it equally.
Exactly.
Well, listen, I think we better wrap up at this point. Thank you very much for being
Thank
with
you.
us. And
Yes.
Morgan, thank you so much. I'm always delighted by your input. And
Oh, thank you. That's a great honor to hear that from you. And I do want to plug this before we depart today. You guys want to hear more from Jim Jatras, you get his book. I tried to warn you. I think you guys probably can infer what's in the book, given his takes today. Yeah, I want to extend my gratitude to Jim Jatras. It's always a pleasure hearing from you and hearing your expertise.
And I do want to clarify that cigarette on the cover is tobacco.
yeah.
Good. I'm glad you did. I had a question, but I wasn't going to put you on the spot. But again, I would just encourage everyone to check out his book and check out his X account. Pardon me, which you can. Do you want to tell them? I think it's just Jim Jatras.
At Jim Jatras. That's correct.
Okay. Yes. All right. Well, without further ado, I want to encourage everyone to join us next week to focus on the news. Goodbye, gentlemen. Have a great
Bye-bye.
weekend.
Thank you.